16 cave stories, 7 levels. These are some of the most horrifying and unforgettable cave dives ever recorded. We'll start with the disturbing and slowly work our way towards the ones that'll stick in your head for days. As always, viewer discretion is highly advised. Level 1. Blue Hole of Santa Rosa. On March 10, 1976, a group of 10 university students from Oklahoma gathered at the Blue Hole in Santa Rosa, New Mexico, for a scuba diving lesson. Among them were David Gregg and Mike Goddard, two enthusiastic divers in their early 20s. The Blue Hole was a popular training site for divers, an artisan well with crystal clear water and a maximum diveable depth of 80 feet. But beneath its calm surface lay a dangerous network of underwater caves that had yet to be fully explored or mapped. When the dive began at 10:30 a.m., everything seemed pretty routine and ordinary. But David and Mike would never resurface. As time went on, their absence was extremely worrying to the group, who began to realize that something had gone horribly wrong. By 11:35 a.m., the New Mexico State Police arrived after being contacted by the group, preparing for the search and rescue operation that could save their lives. The divers quickly figured out that David and Mike had ventured beyond the main pool into the cave system located at a depth of approximately 110 feet. But the caves were treacherous, a complicated labyrinth of tight restrictions, loose rocks, and silt that could easily obscure visibility. The entrance alone was extremely narrow, requiring some of the divers to remove their equipment just to squeeze through. It took almost no time for the divers to piece together exactly what had happened. With no fixed guidelines to mark their path back to safety, the two divers were probably disoriented in the maze-like passages. As time passed, their air supplies dwindled until equipment failure or the emptying of breathing gas led to their inevitable deaths. David and Mike were definitely dead, but the search for their bodies was grueling. On the morning of March 11th, rescue divers entered the cave system on a recovery mission, but trying to navigate the caves was not easy. David's body was discovered later that day in the second chamber at a depth of 125 feet, but his recovery was just the beginning of the ordeal. Efforts to locate Mike continued over the next 2 days, but they kept hitting unexpected obstacles and worsening conditions inside the cave. The exhaust air from the divers' equipment was loosening the rocks, triggering cave-ins that made the whole environment increasingly unstable and unsafe. In one particularly harrowing incident, a diver was nearly trapped when a 3-foot diameter boulder fell on him. Within 2 days, all recovery operations were suspended due to safety concerns. The divers had made 11 efforts to locate his body, and all had failed. Weeks passed with no movement before the divers returned to the cave system to resume recovery efforts on April 25th. This time, divers reached deeper into the cave system than ever before, down to nearly 200 feet, and finally located Mike's body on their third dive at a depth of approximately 177 feet. But it required another dive to extract his remains due to the extreme difficulty of navigating the collapsed passages. Local authorities moved quickly to tackle the problem. To prevent further loss of life, the city of Santa Rosa sealed off the cave entrance with a steel grate. They ordered 2 dump trucks worth of rocks to be poured over the grate to ensure no one could ever access the deadly corridors below. For decades, the cave was closed. Until 2013. In 2013, the ADM Exploration Foundation finally received permission to begin examining the system again. And, of course, 3 years later, another tragic fatality occurred when experienced diver Shane Thompson died during an ADM expedition to map the cave system, leading to the caves being sealed once more, never to be opened again. Level 2. Gollum's Cave, aka Cave of Death. In August 2005, 5 friends gathered in Provo, Utah for what was meant to be a thrilling adventure. Jennifer Galbraith, an experienced caver, had suggested exploring Gollum's Cave, a little-known cavern on the side of Y Mountain. The cave wasn't officially mapped or even documented, and it had an infamous reputation among locals who claimed that many had died trying to explore it. However, Jennifer could reassure her friends that nothing would happen. After all, she had been down there before. Jennifer's first encounter in Gollum's Cave wasn't great. She jokingly called it the Cave of Death because during her earlier visit, the cold water had caused someone to nearly pass out from hypothermia. But she assured her friends that she now knew what to expect and that this knowledge would protect them from any danger. Her reassurances and enthusiasm convinced 3 of her friends to join her, but Joseph Ferguson hesitated. Something about the idea unsettled him, and he ultimately decided to stay behind, waiting outside the cave for the rest of them to leave. In the early morning hours of August 18th, the group arrived at the cave. Armed with nothing more than a single flashlight and guided by Jennifer's confidence, they entered the small opening in the cave floor measuring just 18 by 24 inches and prepared for an adventure they would never forget. The entrance led to a narrow, pitch-black and claustrophobic passage filled with cold water. The tunnel was only about 15 feet long, but dangerously tight. Barely 2 feet wide and 4 feet high, previous explorers had tied a guide rope from a rock at the entrance to some wood inside the chamber to help navigate through the pitch-black underwater passage. Jennifer, having been here before, dove first, disappearing into the underwater tunnel that connected the main cavern to a smaller chamber. One by one, the others followed her lead. The tunnel led them into the inner chamber, a cramped space where they could stand in chest-high water under a tapered 6-foot ceiling. For a brief moment, they were safe. But outside, Joseph was growing increasingly uneasy as time passed. 45 minutes later, his concern turned into real panic when his friends failed to return. Unsure of what was happening, Joseph began calling friends familiar with the cave for advice before contacting police at 6:25 a.m. The rescue crews arrived quickly but faced immense challenges in retrieving the bodies from such a dangerous environment. They pumped air into the cave to increase the oxygen levels, lowered the water level by 2 feet to make entry safer. They used underwater breathing apparatuses and air monitors, allowing rescuers to cautiously navigate this submerged tunnel. Hours later, the search teams discovered Jennifer's body first, wedged in the narrow passage where she had seemingly lost consciousness. Her position appeared to have blocked her friends' escape attempts. The other 3 bodies were found nearby, 1 floating in the tunnel and 2 on its floor. All 4 explorers were wearing sandals. 2 of them were shirtless and clad only in shorts. It was obvious just how clearly unprepared they were for this. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Inside the chamber, the group quickly realized that there was limited, if any, oxygen, forcing them to leave quickly. Jennifer attempted to navigate back through the passage first, but lost consciousness halfway through due to hypoxia caused by low oxygen levels and her exertion in the freezing water. As her body blocked the exit, the other 3 tried desperately to escape, but succumbed one by one as panic set in and oxygen ran out, leading to their drowning. The recovery operation involved multiple agencies and dive teams, with rescuers working methodically to avoid endangering their own lives while removing equipment and retrieving bodies from the cave's depths. By noon that day, all 4 bodies had been recovered and transported to a local mortuary for identification before being sent for autopsies. Within 24 hours of the incident, Gollum's Cave was permanently sealed to prevent further deaths. The Cave of Death had claimed 4 lives in one night, turning the once jokey name into a very grim reality. Joseph Ferguson's decision not to enter spared him from sharing his friend's fate, but he would spend the rest of his life dealing with the trauma. Birthday tragedy. In June 1986, at just 18 years old, Clifford Paulette entered Bat Cave with a group of friends. Bat Cave is a complex Florida cave system known for its narrow underwater tunnels and unpredictable conditions, making it a dangerous destination for even the most experienced divers. Paulette, however, was not equipped with scuba gear or the training necessary for such an environment. He was completely out of his depth. The group had been exploring the cave when they encountered a sump, a submerged passage requiring diving to proceed any further. Despite the lack of proper equipment, Paulette decided to attempt crossing the sump himself by freediving, partly due to his curiosity and partly because of his desire to keep up with his companions. The sump was treacherous. It was narrow, dark, and disorienting. Without scuba gear or a guideline to follow, Paulette quickly lost his way. As he ventured deeper into the submerged passage, the risks grew more and more intense. Visibility in underwater caves is notoriously poor, and the lack of light can make navigation nearly impossible at the best of times. The confined space only added to the danger. Panic can set in easily when movement becomes restricted and oxygen begins to run low. Paulette's friends realized something was wrong when he failed to emerge on the other side of the sump. They immediately sought help. By then, time was already against them. Rescue divers arrived as quickly as possible, but they faced immense challenges in their attempt to locate and retrieve Paulette. The sump's tight confines made maneuvering difficult even for seasoned professionals, let alone ones equipped with scuba gear. The water's murkiness made visibility even worse, forcing rescuers to rely on touch and memory to navigate the passage. And no matter how hard they tried, they could not reach Paulette in time. Cave system was against them. Paulette's body was eventually recovered from the sump, but the autopsy brought an entirely new light to the story. Paulette was drunk at the time, having been partying and celebrating with his friends before the tragedy struck. He died on June 15th, 1986, which just so happened to be his birthday. Level 3. The Intestine. On August 19, 2016, a group of 12 divers set out to explore the underwater caves off the coast of Palinuro, Italy. Among them were Mauro Carmadella, Mauro Tancredi, and Silvio Anzola, 3 highly experienced divers with a long history of successful dives. Carmadella owned a local diving center, and Tancredi was a dive instructor. These 3 knew what they were doing and what they were in for. Yet, despite their expertise, this dive would end in tragedy. The caves of Palinuro are known for their intricate tunnel systems and crystal clear waters, which is highly unusual for caves like this. Yet despite that, they also pose significant risks. Many of the caves have silty floors that can obscure visibility with even the slightest disturbance. The 3 of them were taking part in a training dive with a bigger group, heading down to explore near a wall known as Immersione in Parete. This wall was known to contain openings leading to various other underwater tunnels. The dive began as planned. The group descended into the depths, navigating through the complex cave system. But at some point, Carmadella, Tancredi, and Anzola separated from the main group. Where they went, nobody knew. In fact, to this day, it's not clear whether they intended to enter the cave system or if they were drawn in by curiosity or disorientation. Whatever the motivation, they entered into a section of the cave known as the Scaletta, or Cave of the Ladder, a dangerous area that few ever visited due to its depth and narrow passages. As they moved deeper into the cave, conditions deteriorated rapidly. The silty floor was disturbed by their flippers, clouding the perfect water and reducing visibility to almost nothing. Without clear sightlines or reliable navigation tools, finding the way out became nearly impossible. It was only at this point that these experienced divers realized they had made a critical error, having forgotten to lay the escape rope along the whole length of the cave's lower passage. Had they done so, they could have found their way out. At 10 a.m., the rest of the group surfaced safely and waited for the trio. But when the 3 divers failed to re-emerge at the designated time, everyone grew increasingly alarmed. Attempts to locate them failed quickly. The murky water made it impossible to see anything inside the cave. Unable to solve this themselves, the group contacted the authorities. Rescue operations commenced immediately, but faced major challenges. The narrowness of the tunnels and poor visibility made efforts almost impossible. Divers from Italy's fire brigade and cavers with expertise in underwater caves joined the search, all hoping to be the one to do the impossible. After 4 grueling hours, rescuers located 2 bodies, Camardella and Tancredi, inside a silted-out chamber deep within the Scaletta cave system. Their equipment suggested they had been trapped in a dead-end tunnel with no way out. The recovery of Silvio Anzola's body proved even more difficult than they had expected. His remains were wedged in an especially tight passage further inside the cave. For days, rescue teams worked tirelessly to retrieve him while battling these increasingly dangerous conditions. It took 6 days. They finally managed to retrieve Anzola's body from the scene. The tragedy shocked not only the local diving community, but also those familiar with Pellinuro's underwater caves. Many were asking questions about the 3 divers and whether they were really prepared for something like this. While all 3 were experienced scuba divers, they didn't hold any specific certifications for cave diving, a discipline that requires very different skills and equipment. Experts speculated that their deaths were a result of several factors: disorientation caused by silt clouds, potential equipment failure, and, most likely, panic as they realized they were lost in a labyrinthine system with dwindling air supplies. Friends and family mourned the divers publicly on social media, expressing their disbelief that such skilled professionals could meet their end in such a situation. Crush syndrome. In 1992, a caver in Tennessee was descending into the depths of a challenging cave system known as Banshee Hole. His name has never been publicized. He would go on to become one of the most notable stories of caving in the region. The caver had been exploring Banshee Hole alone, which in itself is a highly risky move. The cave is notorious for tight spaces and vertical drops, requiring serious technical skill and endurance just to get through it. It's not known whether he was able to get into the cave and explore it, but at some point during his ascent or descent, he encountered difficulties that left him unable to move, hanging in his harness. Nobody knows whether it was exhaustion or equipment failure, but what is certain is that he remained suspended for approximately 4 hours before rescue teams arrived to help him. The Cumberland County Rescue Squad responded swiftly, arriving within 40 minutes and immediately assessing the situation. It wasn't a total doomed disaster. The victim was still alive, but he was visibly deteriorating. His body sagged against the harness, his breathing labored, and his skin pale and clammy, a clear indication that his circulation was severely compromised. If they were to save him, they had to be extremely careful. The rescuers worked methodically to stabilize him and free him from the harness. They reinforced the rigging to ensure it wouldn't fall, and then every single movement they made was precise, every command deliberate. Time was of the essence not only to extract him, but also to manage the physical trauma caused by prolonged suspension like this. If they could get him out, he potentially had an even higher risk of dying. Simply put, they had to save him right, or they would kill him. Hanging like this in a harness for hours restricted blood flow to certain areas of the body, causing toxins like potassium and lactic acid to accumulate in the compressed tissues. This condition, known as crush syndrome, can become life-threatening when circulation is suddenly restored. The crew eventually succeeded in lowering him to the cave floor, but just as things were looking good, tragedy struck. The caver was carefully released from the harness but immediately went into cardiac arrest. Crush syndrome was claiming him. The rescuers immediately initiated CPR, but despite their efforts, they could not revive him. At that time, crush syndrome was poorly understood, but later medical science began to recognize exactly what was going on. When blood flow is restored after being restricted for hours, toxins flood the bloodstream all at once. In severe cases like this one, the sudden surge overwhelms the victim's vital organs and leads to catastrophic shock or total organ failure. The incident led experts to publicly stress that cavers should never begin rope ascents alone and should be rescued quickly if immobilized on a rope. In this case, even being saved is enough to kill you. And while we have you, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Jacob's Well. Jacob's Well, nestled in the Texas Hill Country, is a serene spring that harbors a deadly secret beneath its pretty appearance. Its crystal clear waters lure swimmers and thrill seekers from all over, but this is one of the most treacherous cave systems in the world. Over the years, at least 9 confirmed deaths and possibly as many as 12 have occurred here, making it an infamous spot among divers. Of course, that notoriety is exactly why so many divers flock there. Everybody wants to be the one to survive the impossible. The underwater cave system is composed of 4 chambers, each progressively more dangerous. The first chamber is relatively straightforward, dropping 25 feet into the spring. The second chamber descends another 35 feet, but it's notorious for its deceptive fake chimney, a false exit which has trapped and killed at least one other diver who mistook it for the way out. Those who manage not to fall for that trap make their way down to the third chamber, which slopes gently downward to a depth of 75 feet, and then to the fourth chamber, a narrow passageway that has claimed just as many lives due to its tight confines and unstable gravel slopes. Divers must squeeze through openings as narrow as 15 inches wide, often pushing their gear ahead of them in total darkness. Even seasoned divers have met their end here. One of the most famous incidents occurred in September 1979. 2 young divers from Pasadena, Kent Malpin and Mark Brashear, decided to explore Jacob's Well for the first time. Both of them were experienced. Ken, in particular, had been diving since age 12 and was a certified instructor, yet that confidence proved fatal. Later at night, while others in their group were setting up camp, Malpin and Brashear entered the well with plans to reach that infamous fourth chamber, knowing full well about its history. Witnesses saw them backing into the narrow entrance without safety lines or backup lights. Recovery efforts stretched over a week, but ultimately failed to retrieve their bodies. While some remains were found years later, Kent's body was only discovered 2 decades after his death. But it's not just the physical, environmental challenges that test cavers here. It's also a matter of panic and equipment failure. In July 2015, Diego Adame, a 21-year-old freediver from San Antonio, was diving into the caves when he suddenly lost one of his flippers and began struggling against the water's strong flow. His oxygen was rapidly running out as he fought to ascend without the proper equipment to do so. So close to the surface, but still weighed down by his equipment, Diego made the risky choice to cut away his weight belt and kick furiously towards the surface. He broke through just as his breath gave out, a narrow escape that left him shaken but alive. He was one of the few people ever to make it out of the caves with his life. Even those tasked with recovering victims face life-threatening situations in Jacob's Well. Don Dibble, a dive shop owner with decades of experience, nearly lost his life during a recovery mission in 1979 while searching for Malpin and Brashear's remains. Dibble became trapped in sliding gravel at the bottom of the third chamber, buried past his waist with only 10 minutes of air left in his tank. Unable to free himself or signal for help, he began to spasm involuntarily. In an insane twist of fate, it was those spasms that miraculously dislodged him from the gravel just in time for rescue divers to intervene. But it wasn't a clean rescue. Dibble suffered severe injuries during his ascent, and the air trapped inside him expanded as he surfaced, rupturing his stomach wall. Authorities have done everything to seal off Jacob's well, but every effort has failed, in part because the divers are so determined to explore it no matter what. Authorities once installed a steel grate at about 70 feet down to prevent access to the caves, but within months it was dismantled by divers who left a defiant note reading, "You can't keep us out." It doesn't matter how many people die there, the divers want to explore it. Level 4. Nutty Putty. On November 24th, 2009, John Edward Jones, a 26-year-old medical student and father of one, ventured into Utah's Nutty Putty Cave with his brother Josh and a few other family members. It was meant to be a fun outing during Thanksgiving week, a chance to reconnect through an activity they had enjoyed as children. John had grown up exploring caves with his father and siblings, but it had been years since they had done this. At 6 feet tall and weighing around 200 pounds, he was no longer the small boy who could easily navigate tight spaces, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try. Nutty Putty Cave, located southwest of Utah Lake, was notorious for its narrow passageways and challenging twists, which had led many experienced cavers into serious trouble. Even though it had been reopened earlier that year with stricter safety protocols, many cavers chose to avoid it. Among its many unique features was a passage called the Birth Canal, a tight but navigable route that John intended to explore. However, as he crawled deeper into the cave, he mistakenly entered an unmapped section known as Ed's Push. This area was far narrower than the Birth Canal and much harder to get through. Believing he was on the correct path, John pressed forward head first into a downward vertical fissure measuring just 10 by 18 inches. He soon realized he had made a mistake. The fissure abruptly ended in a dead end, leaving him with no room to turn around. Attempting to back out, he became wedged in an almost completely vertical upside-down position, with his arms pinned beneath him. Trapped approximately 400 feet from the cave entrance, John was stuck in one of the most dangerous positions for the human body. Josh discovered John's predicament and quickly alerted the rest of the group. By midnight, professional rescuers arrived to assess the situation. Over the next 27 hours, a total of 137 rescuers worked tirelessly to free John. The narrow tunnel restricted movement, making it nearly impossible to bring in equipment or tools. Rescuers had to resort to ropes, pulleys, and even peanut oil in attempts to slide him out of the fissure. They managed to partially lift him using a complex pulley system anchored to bolts drilled into the cave walls. The strain on the system caused the key bolt to fail, leading to the rescuers losing their grip on John. He slid back into the crevice, this time even deeper than before. The failure not only set back their progress, but also left John in an even more precarious position. His body was now under extreme stress from being inverted for so long. Blood pooled in his head and chest due to gravity, and his circulation was severely compromised. As the hours passed, John managed to remain conscious for much of the ordeal and communicated with rescuers as they worked frantically around him. By the evening of November 25th, his breathing became shallow and irregular. A medical professional who managed to reach him confirmed that he had gone into cardiac arrest shortly before midnight. After nearly 28 hours trapped in unimaginable conditions, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead at the scene. Due to the location of his body and the risks involved in further excavation efforts, authorities determined that recovering John's remains would be too dangerous. With his family's consent, Nutty Putty Cave was permanently sealed shortly after his death. Explosives were used to collapse part of the cave near where John's body rested, ensuring it would remain undisturbed. And just to make sure nobody could ever repeat the incident, concrete was poured over all entrances to prevent future access. Today, a plaque at the Nutty Putty Cave entrance commemorates John Edward Jones. Bloomington Cave. On December 24, 2002, Kylie Jacquez, a 17-year-old from Plainsfield, Illinois, embarked on a recreational outing with her residential treatment group, Integrity House. The group consisted of 15 students and 5 counselors, all part of a program designed to help teenagers struggling with emotional issues, substance abuse, and behavioral disorders. The group ventured into Bloomington Cave, a sprawling and notoriously dangerous cave system near St. George, Utah. The excursion was meant to provide the teens with a break from their structured lives at the treatment center, a chance to bond and explore. But for Kylie, it would end in tragedy. The group had made their way deep into the cave system, but to keep them safe, the leader urged them to hold hands while navigating across a cliff in the dark. The wetness and lack of clarity led Kylie to lose her footing, falling nearly 100 feet from a ledge within the cave. Several students and counselors saw her plunge, describing the fall as sudden and catastrophic, with no time to react or prevent it. Attempts were made to perform CPR on her at the scene, but she was already in full cardiac arrest by the time they reached her. The remote nature of Bloomington Cave made it difficult for emergency services to respond to the emergency. The group had no way to call for immediate help from inside the cave system. Someone had to hike back out to its entrance to alert authorities. And by the time rescuers arrived, it was clear that Kylie could not be saved. But still, her body had to be painstakingly recovered from the cave's narrow and treacherous passages, a process that lasted much of the day. Kylie's death raised serious questions about the safety protocols, or lack thereof, employed by Integrity House during these kinds of outings. Bloomington Cave had already been flagged as highly dangerous. Just earlier that year, another teenager had been rescued after falling in the same cave system. Sheriff Kirk Smith later remarked that this was the first fatality he could recall occurring in Bloomington Cave, and used it to reaffirm its inherent risks. But in the immediate aftermath of Kylie's death, Integrity House remained tight-lipped about what had happened. A man answering calls at the facility declined to comment on the incident when contacted by reporters. However, it turns out that was the best thing they could have done. Shortly after the incident, Integrity House began lying about the circumstances surrounding Kylie's death. Instead of acknowledging that she fell due to poor supervision in a dangerous environment, representatives from Integrity House reportedly claimed she died of a heart attack, a blatant misrepresentation of events. This false narrative isn't new. Many residential treatment programs like Integrity House have a habit of doing things like this. These programs operate under what has come to be known as the troubled teen industry, and they've long been accused of prioritizing profit over safety and well-being, often subjecting teens to harsh conditions and questionable practices under the guise of therapy. In Kylie's case, Integrity House failed not only its duty to protect her, but also in its moral obligation to tell the truth about her death. It was too worried about its own reputation and profits. Former employees and residents of Integrity House have since spoken out about systemic issues within the program. Allegations of abuse, both physical and emotional, have been levied against its operators. Kylie's death was a tragedy, but also something sadly predictable given the circumstances. Font-Estremar. In the summer of 1955, Jean-Claude Guare and his brother Dumas were part of a small team attempting to explore the Font-Estremar cave for a documentary film. Font-Estremar is a treacherous underwater cave system in southern France full of mysterious labyrinthine caves, which the brothers believed would be incredible on camera. The team had planned their exploration carefully, aiming to focus specifically on the newly discovered passages. Jean-Claude Dumas and a well-known geologist named Haroun Tazif wasted no time, immediately heading into one of these new galleries while their colleagues ascended to recharge the equipment. The gallery was narrow and uncharted, which made for a perfect setting for dramatic shots, but perilous for divers unfamiliar with its twists and turns. As the three moved deeper, the visibility suddenly deteriorated. A surge of murky brown water swept through the gallery, disorienting them instantly. And it was during this chaos that Jean-Claude became separated from the group. Harun Tazif and Dumas managed to escape the chaos and surface safely. Jean-Claude was nowhere to be found. Obviously, Dumas was so shocked and desperate that he immediately organized a search effort, descending again into the abyss with hopes of finding his brother trapped in an air pocket or clinging to some ledge in the dark. But Font-Estremont left no trace of Jean-Claude anywhere. The murky water obscured visibility, and the confusing, seemingly contradictory passages offered no clues as to where he could have disappeared to. After hours of searching, Dumas was forced to confront the grim reality. His brother was gone. The aftermath was devastating for Dumas. He couldn't allow his brother to stay down there, even if he was dead. So he contacted renowned diver Jacques Cousteau in Paris for help. Cousteau dispatched a skilled team from Marseille to continue the search, but their efforts also failed. The cave's depths were unforgiving, made more dangerous by the outdated equipment and limited technology of the era. After days of exhaustive exploration, the search was called off, leaving Dumas grappling with guilt. For 3 years, Jean-Claude's fate remained a mystery. Everybody agreed that he had died, but how, where, why, nobody had any idea. His disappearance became an eerie legend among the divers who frequented Font-Estremont, a cautionary tale about what could happen. But then came an unexpected discovery. In 1958, a diver named Mr. Bono stumbled upon Jean-Claude's remains by chance while exploring a chimney-shaped passage near the cave's exit at a depth of 7 meters. The body was wedged tightly in an almost invisible crevice, somewhere that nobody would have ever noticed him. But retrieving Jean-Claude's body proved impossible due to its precarious position and the risks involved in recovery operations at these kinds of depths. To this day, his remains are still down there. The documentary project was abandoned, too overshadowed by grief and regret for Dumas to even think about moving forward. Level 5. Zacaton Sinkhole. On April 6, 1994, Sheck Exley and Jim Bowden descended into the Zacaton Sinkhole in northeastern Mexico, aiming to break records in what was already one of the most dangerous environments a diver could face. Zacaton, the world's deepest known water-filled sinkhole, plunges over 1,000 feet into darkness. For Exley, a pioneer in cave diving with decades of experience and thousands of dives under his belt, this was the culmination of years of preparation. It was also the culmination of his life. The dive was meticulously planned. Exley and Bowden entered the water around 9:50 a.m., each following separate descent lines spaced about 25 to 30 feet apart. The plan was simple: descend as far as possible using mixed gases tailored for extreme depths, then ascend carefully while undergoing hours of decompression stops. At these depths, divers faced risks like nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, and high-pressure nervous syndrome, any of which can prove fatal. But Exley and Bowden were doing everything to ensure that they would not fall victim to any of them. The descent started smoothly. Bowden reported seeing Exley's light in the distance as they passed 800 feet. But as Bowden reached 925 feet, breaking his own depth record, he realized his gas reserves were running out faster than expected. He aborted his dive and began the grueling ascent to the surface, leaving Exley to continue alone into the abyss. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Support divers stationed at various depths monitored their progress. They watched as Bowden's bubbles reappeared after about 15 minutes, a sign he was ascending. But Exley's bubbles never returned. The surface team slowly grew concerned as time passed without any indication of his survival. Safety divers descended to check for signs of life, but found nothing. No bubbles, no movement. The laminated pages of Exley's dive profile were floating toward the surface, a grim signal that something had gone terribly wrong. 3 days later, during an effort to recover equipment from the dive lines, Exley's body unexpectedly surfaced. He had apparently drifted upward from deeper within the sinkhole and became entangled in one of the lines. His equipment was intact, his mask still on, and one tank still contained air. His wrist-mounted dive computer recorded a maximum depth of 904 feet just 9 minutes into the dive, indicating that whatever killed him happened quickly after reaching that depth. The exact cause of Exley's death remains a mystery. His tanks contained the correct gas mix for the planned dive, and there were no signs of equipment failure. Theories range from high-pressure nervous syndrome-induced tremors to oxygen toxicity, or even a combination of factors exacerbated by the extreme pressure and stress at such depths. Some have suggested that Exley may have deliberately tied himself to the line, knowing that his death was coming. In doing that, he would ensure his body would eventually be recovered without endangering others. Jim Bowden emerged alive, but physically affected by decompression sickness and emotionally shaken by the loss of his friend and diving partner. He later described completing his 9-hour ascent as a mechanical process numb from grief and exhaustion. Despite decades of experience and countless innovations in diving safety, many of which he himself had pioneered, Exley succumbed to the very risks he had spent his life mastering. His passing left a void in the world of cave diving, but also served as a stark reminder of its dangers. In Zacaton's cold depths, Czech Exley pushed human limits one final time and paid with his life. Floyd Collins, Sand Cave. On July 30th, 1925, Floyd Collins entered Sand Cave in Kentucky on a solo expedition, hoping to discover a new tourist attraction. The cave's location near a busy road made it an ideal site for drawing visitors, and Collins had struck a deal with the landowner to share profits if the cave proved viable. Armed with a kerosene lantern, he squeezed through narrow passageways, some so tight he had to crawl on his stomach. Deep inside the cave, Collins encountered challenges but pressed on. His lantern flickered, a warning sign for any caver, and he reluctantly turned back toward the surface. As he maneuvered through one of the tightest passages, disaster struck. A 27-pound rock dislodged and pinned his left leg. Trapped in a narrow crawlway 60 feet below ground, Collins struggled to free himself, but only succeeded in burying himself deeper in loose gravel. By the next morning, locals noticed Collins hadn't returned home. His jacket remained at the cave's entrance, prompting concern. Jewel Doyle, the landowner's teenage son, crawled into the cave and heard Collins calling for help and asking Jewel to go and get his brothers. Floyd's younger brother, Homer, arrived soon after and was one of the few able to navigate the treacherous passageways to reach him. Homer brought food and water to sustain Floyd while the rescuers devised plans to free him. The task was daunting. The passage was dangerously narrow, and any movement risked further collapse. Word of Floyd's predicament spread quickly throughout Cave City and beyond. Reporters flocked to the scene, including William Skeets Miller from the Courier-Journal. Miller's small stature allowed him to reach Floyd and conduct interviews from inside the cave, a gift that earned him a Pulitzer Prize. His reports captivated readers nationwide as radio broadcasts shared updates on Floyd's condition. The rescue effort became a media sensation, drawing thousands of spectators to Sand Cave's entrance. Vendors set up food stands, turning the site into a circus-like atmosphere. Rescuers tried multiple strategies to free Floyd. On February 2nd, they attempted to pull him out using a harness and rope, but failed disastrously. In fact, the effort injured Floyd more as his body was dragged against jagged rock ceilings. Another plan involved removing rocks surrounding his leg piece by piece, but progress was painfully slow. Meanwhile, engineers rigged an electric light down the passage to provide warmth and visibility. The situation worsened on February 4th when melting ice caused by campfires outside destabilized the cave walls. A collapse blocked access to Floyd entirely, forcing rescuers to abandon direct approaches and dig a vertical shaft instead. The shaft required painstaking manual labor. Pickaxes and shovels were used as mechanical equipment risked suffocating Floyd with fumes in the enclosed space. The progress was agonizingly slow as workers encountered boulders that slowed digging further. As days turned into weeks, hope dwindled. Rescuers faced exhaustion and harsh winter weather, while rumors swirled among spectators, some claiming that Floyd was already dead or that the rescue was staged for publicity. On February 16th, after nearly 2 weeks of digging through fog and rain, rescuers broke through to Floyd's chamber, but it was too late. He had died days earlier from exposure and starvation while lying in freezing water at the bottom of the cave. His body remained trapped as rescuers deemed it too dangerous to extract him without risking further collapses. Floyd Collins' tragic ordeal lasted 17 days underground before ending in heartbreak. His death marked one of America's earliest media spectacles, captivating millions with its blend of hope, despair, and human perseverance. Level 6. Mossdale Cavern Flooding. On June 24, 1967, 10 cavers entered Mossdale Caverns in Yorkshire, one of Britain's most challenging cave systems. The group was mostly made up of members of the Leeds University Union Speleological Society who wanted to map and explore the cave passages, some of which were barely navigable due to tight squeezes and waterlogged crawls. Mossdale was infamous for its flooding risks, but the weather seemed pretty manageable that morning. The team split into 2 groups. 6 ventured deeper into the system to continue their mapping efforts, while 4 turned back after reaching Rough Chamber, deciding not to proceed further. The 4 who exited included Morag Forbes, who returned to the entrance later that evening. By then, the weather had drastically worsened. Heavy rainfall had left the cave entrance submerged under a swirling lake of floodwater. Alarmed by the implications for her friends still inside, she ran nearly 3 miles straight, right across the muddy moor to Yarnbury Farm to raise the alarm. The farmer contacted the police, and rescue teams were mobilized. But efforts to access the cave were immediately undermined by high water levels. Rescuers began diverting the water on Mossdale Beck by digging trenches and constructing dams near the entrance. Fire service pumps were brought in to lower water levels further. But no matter what, it took nearly 12 hours before anyone could enter the cave system safely. The rescue operation drew hundreds of volunteers from local caving clubs and organizations like the Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Association and Cave Rescue Organization. The scale of the effort was immense, with bulldozers and even human barriers used to keep floodwaters at bay while teams worked tirelessly through deteriorating conditions. When rescuers finally entered Mossdale Caverns, they faced even more harrowing conditions inside. The passages were narrow and flooded in places, making progress slow and dangerous. 5 bodies were discovered in a section known as Far Marathon Crawls, a long passage only 10 inches high in parts. The scene was grim, with rescuers reporting crawling over corpses wedged into tight spaces as they searched for survivors. The 6th caver, John Ogden, was found 2 days later in a narrow fissure further in than where his companions had died. He had apparently gone looking for refuge in hopes of finding breathable air, but died like the others. The tragedy marked one of Britain's worst caving disasters. All 6 victims were experienced cavers familiar with Mossdale's dangers, yet even their expertise could not save them from the sudden flash flood that overwhelmed the cave system that day. Following the recovery efforts, a controversial decision was made by authorities. The bodies would remain within Mossdale Caverns. The coroner ruled that further attempts to retrieve them would pose too great a risk to rescuers. Instead, concrete was poured into the main entrance to seal off access permanently. Years later, with permission from families, surviving members of their caving club buried their remains deeper within a chamber known as mud caverns. This burial was carried out discreetly to avoid public scrutiny or legal complications. Today, a memorial plaque affixed near the entrance bears their name. Above ground on Conistone Moor lies a cairn, marking their final resting place beneath layers of limestone. Poganica Bay Tragedy. In 2002, Miroslav Kuklis, a 31-year-old Czech diver, embarked on a night dive with friends in the underwater caves of Poganica Bay, Croatia. But what happened would go on to spark suspicion, confusion, and an investigation that would leave more questions than answers. The dive took place on the night of September 10, 2002. Miroslav and his group had been enjoying their sailing trip when they impulsively decided to explore the depths of the bay's underwater cave system. These caves were infamous for their complexity and danger, even in broad daylight. At night, navigating their narrow passages was even worse, a bold, reckless activity that would never end well. The group descended into the water around 10:30 p.m. Miroslav initially stayed behind on the boat, but later decided to join them without informing anyone of his plan. The others soon surfaced after realizing the cave's depths were a lot riskier than they expected, but Miroslav did not return. 2 divers re-entered the water to search for him but found no trace. Hours passed with no sign of Miroslav, but by midnight they called the authorities. Their friend had vanished without a trace. The next morning, police divers arrived to continue the search. Suddenly, one of the divers surfaced in distress with decompression sickness and was rushed to a hospital. His partner never emerged from the water. A second team of divers later recovered both bodies. The police diver was found disoriented and drowned in a shallow section of the cave, while Miroslav's body was discovered much deeper at 54 meters. His mask was missing, his regulator was out of his mouth, and a knife was lodged in his chest. A weapon. This discovery transformed what initially seemed like a diving accident into a potential crime scene. Investigators immediately suspected foul play. Miroslav's friends were questioned extensively and subjected to polygraph tests. 2 members reacted suspiciously to words like knife and blood, suggesting some potential truth to the theories that he might have been on board and his body dumped in the cave as a cover-up. However, forensic analysis found no evidence supporting this theory. A reddish stain on the boat initially thought to be blood turned out to be nothing more than anti-fouling paint. Attention soon turned to Miroslav's diving gear and computer for clues about his final moments, but his equipment was in perfect working order, ruling out mechanical failure as a cause of death. All they had to go on was data from his dive computer, which soon revealed a harrowing sequence. Miroslav had descended rapidly into the cave's deep gallery before attempting to ascend, likely after realizing he was lost. But he mistakenly entered a shallow passage resembling the exit, becoming disoriented again before he returned to the deep gallery. For over 30 minutes, he seemed to search for an escape route before stopping near an air pocket at the top of the gallery for several minutes, possibly resting or strategizing his next move. Then, something catastrophic happened. He lost buoyancy and sank to the bottom of the gallery where he was ultimately found. The knife wound raised immediate suspicion of homicide, but further investigation suggested otherwise. The stab wound matched Miroslav's own diving knife, which had been designed with safety features that made it unsuitable for stabbing someone else underwater, especially in such a confined space. There were no defensive wounds on his body or signs of struggle on his suit or gear. The autopsy revealed that Miroslav had inhaled seawater after being stabbed, but died within 2 minutes due to blood loss from a punctured lung and severed artery. Toxicology reports showed a blood alcohol level of 0.114%, which could have impaired his judgment and made nitrogen narcosis worse, leaving him highly confused. Ultimately, the conclusion was that Miroslav likely inflicted the wound himself in an act of desperation as he faced imminent drowning. The isolation, Darkness and mounting panic inside the cave may have driven him to make this tragic decision. Despite this conclusion, doubts lingered among some experts and members of Miroslav's family who doubt that Miroslav would ever willingly kill himself, even in those circumstances. Donaldson's Cave Accident. On July 1st, 1985, Roman Lazowski and his friend Michael Hall entered Bronson Cave, part of the Donaldson Cave system in Spring Mill State Park, Indiana. The pair, clad in shorts and tennis shoes and armed with flashlights, planned to traverse the underground stream connecting the two caves. But they failed to account for the heavy rains, which soon turned the cave's stream into a torrent. As they ventured deeper into the cave, the water surged with increasing force, sweeping Lazowski off his feet and sweeping him downstream. He managed to grab a narrow 6-inch ledge a few feet above the water, just about catching himself and warning Hall of the danger. Hall attempted to follow him, but he was too overpowered by the rushing water. Unable to grab onto something, he was swept away and disappeared into the darkness. Miraculously, Hall was carried by the current to the Donaldson Cave entrance, where he emerged battered but alive. Believing Lazowski had drowned inside, Hall sought help. But all the while, Lazowski clung to his ledge inside the cave, convinced help was on the way. He didn't have much time, though. The water level rose dangerously close to the ceiling, just 2 inches below in parts. Lazowski constantly had to turn from side to side on his narrow ledge, using his elbows, knees, and head to maintain his position, stranded in a crevice just above the rushing current. The cave's temperature hovered around 54 degrees Fahrenheit, sapping his body heat minute by minute. A former Marine with survival training, Lazowski fought to stay calm despite his mounting exhaustion and hypothermia. Outside, emergency crews assembled, including cavers, firefighters, and search dog units. However, high water levels and intermittent rain prevented much progress from being made. Rescuers attempting to enter Bronson Cave were forced back by powerful currents after advancing only a few hundred feet. Teams entering Donaldson Cave from its outlet faced just as many obstacles in the form of total impassable sections where the ceiling nearly touched the water. By Tuesday night, desperation grew among rescuers as they tried alternative methods to reach Lazowski. They attempted digging into Donaldson Cave from an adjacent system, but quickly realized they couldn't do it in a safe or speedy way. Heavy drilling equipment was brought in to bore through rock above the passageway where Lazowski was believed to be trapped, but there was just no time to do it. Inside the cave, Lazowski was dehydrated and freezing, hallucinating conversations with an imaginary companion about basketball draft picks to keep his mind occupied. As his legs went numb from long periods of immobility, he hit them repeatedly to restore circulation. Despite moments of despair and physical collapse, he refused to give up. On Wednesday morning, nearly 55 hours after Lazowski became trapped, rescuers finally made contact with him using a bullhorn after spotting him through a narrow gap in Donaldson Cave's ceiling. They urged him to conserve energy and hold on as they worked to reach him through treacherous conditions. At around 5 p.m., rescuer Steve Collins managed to reach Lazowski, but faced another challenge, crossing the raging stream separating them. Collins threw a rope across for Lazowski to secure on his side, but just as they attempted to pull him across, an anchoring piton gave way, sweeping both men downstream. Fortunately, other rescuers downstream caught them before further harm occurred. Finally, equipped with a wetsuit top and helmet for protection against hypothermia, Lazowski was secured to a rope system for a Tyrolean traverse above the stream. It would set up a tight, fixed rope with Lazowski pulling himself across, feet away from the raging water below. If he fell, the water would sweep him away, and there was no telling if he would be as lucky as Hall. Inch by inch, rescuers guided him towards safety until he emerged from Donaldson Cave at approximately 8 p.m., an incredible 57 hours after entering Bronson Cave. Lazowski was rushed to a hospital where he was treated for hypothermia, dehydration, and exhaustion, but suffered no life-threatening injuries beyond cuts and bruises. His survival was attributed to sheer determination and Marine Corps training that taught him how to endure extreme conditions. Level 7. Moss's Passage. On March 22, 1959, Neil Moss, a 20-year-old philosophy student at Balliol College, Oxford, ventured into Peak Caverns in Derbyshire, England. Known locally as the Devil's Ass, the cave system was a labyrinth of narrow passages and shafts, many of which had never been explored before. Moss and a small group of caving companions aimed to explore one of these uncharted vertical shafts deep within the system. Their goal was discovery, but what unfolded was one of the most harrowing and tragic incidents in British caving history. The expedition began smoothly as Moss descended into the unexplored shaft using a flexible-sided ladder. The passage twisted and narrowed as he maneuvered downward, eventually reaching a section known as the corkscrew. This part of the shaft was so tight that it required him to contort his body to pass through. Despite the challenge, Moss pressed on, determined to explore further. However, just below this section, he encountered an unexpected obstacle, a collection of boulders obstructing his path. After dislodging the boulders, he pushed forward, heading deeper into the shaft, but suddenly, he was stuck. His body had become wedged in an elliptical fissure only 18 inches wide. At first, his companions believed they could pull him free with ropes. They lowered a line for him to secure around himself and began hauling him upward. The effort failed repeatedly as the ropes snagged against the jagged rock walls. Each attempt left Moss more tightly wedged in place. He called up to his companions with an eerie calmness, saying, "I say I'm stuck. I can't budge an inch." What initially seemed like a solvable problem quickly escalated into a life-threatening crisis. As hours passed, the situation grew dire. Moss's position in the shaft blocked airflow, causing carbon dioxide from his own breathing to accumulate rapidly in the confined space. The toxic atmosphere began affecting not only Moss, but also his would-be rescuers. Disorientation set in as oxygen levels dropped. 3 members of his team even passed out while waiting for help to arrive. Word of Moss's plight spread quickly, and within hours, hundreds of volunteers, cavers, rescue workers, and even locals converged on Peak Cavern to help. Specialized teams from the Royal Air Force, National Coal Board, and Royal Navy joined the efforts. Oxygen cylinders were rushed to the site in hopes of improving air quality within the shaft. Rescuers devised plans to extricate Moss using ropes and pulleys or by breaking apart sections of rock around him. Yet despite their ingenuity and determination, every attempt failed. The foul air inside the shaft posed a nearly impossible challenge. Experienced cavers who descended into the passage were forced back by dizziness and nausea caused by carbon dioxide poisoning. One rescuer managed to reach Moss's shoulder, but had to retreat when he began gasping for air himself and hallucinating. Another volunteer secured a rope around Moss's chest, but when they tried pulling him upward, it only compressed his chest further, worsening his breathing difficulties. By March 23rd, nearly 24 hours after Moss became trapped, hope began to wane. His breathing grew labored and sporadic as he slipped in and out of consciousness. Volunteers continued their efforts through the night and into the following day. Among them was June Bailey, an 18-year-old typist who volunteered for what seemed to be a desperate last-ditch attempt, breaking Moss's collarbones to narrow his shoulders enough for extraction. However, by the time she arrived at the scene early on March 24th, it was too late. At approximately 3 a.m., Neil Moss was declared dead by an RAF doctor who had been assisting with the rescue operation. The declaration was made without physically seeing Moss's body. His death was presumed based on silence from below and deteriorating conditions in the shaft. Moss's father, Eric Moss, had been present throughout, waiting at the cave entrance for any news on his son's condition. Devastated by his son's death, but unwilling to risk further lives and recovery efforts, He requested that Neil's body be left where it was. The shaft was sealed with loose rocks gathered from nearby chambers, a symbolic closure rather than a permanent entombment, and an inscription was later placed at the site in Neil's memory. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Britain and beyond. Media outlets worldwide reported on the incident with morbid fascination and admiration for the rescuers' efforts. The section of Peak Cavern where Neil lost his life is now known as Moss Chamber, a somber tribute to a young man whose curiosity led him into one of caving's darkest chapters. His death remains one of Britain's most haunting caving tragedies. Kalimba Cenote Incident. On December 9, 2004, 9 certified cave divers entered Mexico's Sacactun cave system through Cenote Kalimba. Their plan was to split into 2 teams to fully explore the cave system. Team B, 4 American divers including Kent Hirsch and Michael Nast, headed into the labyrinthine underwater tunnels. Their plan: navigate the Paso de Lagarto line toward Cenote Kalimba's exit. It was simple and well planned, but it would not be a success. Early into the exploration, Team B misinterpreted the snap and gap line near an intersection, causing them to make a catastrophic error. Instead of turning right toward the Kalimba snap and gap line, which would have left them 20 meters from safety, they swam left. For 25 minutes, they progressed 427 meters downstream into darkness. That mistake went unnoticed until 7:10 a.m., when they realized that those familiar markers that should be guiding them to the exit were nowhere to be found. One diver deployed a safety spool to search for the correct path while the others waited on the Paso de Lagarto line. But that search failed miserably. Team B had no choice but to turn back the way they came, fracturing into 2 buddy pairs. Gene and William worked together to find the exit, leading the way as Kent and Michael followed behind, sharing air as they went. But as they swam single file through the narrow passages, their tanks began scraping against the rocks, their flippers kicking up the silt and reducing visibility. Time was now the enemy. 129 minutes into the dive, Gene and William finally breached the surface with 500 psi left in one tank, but their exit required hyper-controlled breathing. Every exhale had to be measured against their dwindling air reserves. Kent and Michael weren't as fortunate. Trapped in a 3-foot-wide tunnel 250 feet from Kalimba's exit, they emptied their tanks. Investigators later found their bodies, their primary lights still burning, backup lights abandoned on the cave floor. The guide re-entered the water upon learning 2 divers were missing. He found Kent first, face towards the exit, no air in his tanks. Michael floated near the ceiling, his long hose tangled in debris. Recovery of the bodies required dismantling their gear in claustrophobic darkness, their dead bodies stiffened by rigor mortis. In the investigation that followed, it became clear that they made many, many mistakes. Team B missed multiple opportunities to correct course, instead wandering further into risky territory. Throughout the whole thing, the divers carried cameras documenting their final 93 minutes, though the footage showed no visible distress before air starvation. Ultimately, a 12-minute survival gap separated the buddies. Gene and William exited at 129 minutes. Kent and Michael died at 141 minutes into the dive. The divers had completely overlooked basic diving principles. Team B failed to fix their line at that fatal intersection, eliminating a critical reference point for backtracking. Their decision to swim downstream, which goes against standard protocol, sealed their fate. Navigation arrows went ignored, gas management rules were violated. It all seemed inevitable. Today, the cave remains a popular diving spot. If you're looking for more disturbing content, check out our other channel's video on the most disturbing body cam footage.